Chapter 8 of Spinning Wheel Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tara Dow. Spinning Wheel Stories by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 8. The Little House in the Garden. "I think we little ones ought to have a story all to ourselves now," said one of the smaller lads, as they gathered round the fire with unabated interest. "So do I, and I've got a little tale that will just suit you, I fancy. The older boys and girls can go and play games if they don't care to hear," answered Aunt Elinor, producing the well-worn portfolio. "Thanks, we will try a bit, and if it is very namby-pamby we can run," said Geoff, catching sight of the name of the first chapter. Aunt Elinor smiled and began to read about The Little House in the Garden. 1. Bears. A brown bear was the first tenant. In fact, it was built for him, and this is the way it happened. A man and his wife were driving through the woods up among the mountains, and hearing a queer sound, looked about them till they spied two baby bears in a tree. "Those must be the cubs of the old bear that was killed last week," said Mr. Hitchcock, much interested all at once. "Poor little things! How will they get on without their mother? They look half scared to death, and cry like real babies," said the kind woman. "They will starve if we don't take care of them. I'll shake them down. You catch them in your shawl, and we'll see what we can do for them." So Mr. Hitchcock climbed up the tree, to the great dismay of the two orphans, who growled funny little growls and crept as far out on the branch as they dared. "Shake it easy, John, or they will fall and be killed," cried the wife, holding out her shawl for this new kind of fruit to fall into. Down they came, one after the other, and at first were too frightened to fight. So Mr. Hitchcock got them into the wagon safely bundled up, and Mrs. Hitchcock soothed their alarm by gentle pattings and motherly words, till they ceased to struggle and cuddled down to sleep like two confiding puppies, for they were not much bigger. Mr. Hitchcock kept the hotel that stood at the foot of the King of the Mountains, and in summer the house was full of people. So he was glad of any new attraction, and the little bears were the delight of many children. At first Tom and Jerry trotted and tumbled about like frolicsome puppies, and led easy lives, petted, fed, and admired, till they grew so big and bold that, like other young creatures, their pranks made mischief as well as fun. Tom would steal all the good things he could lay his paws on in kitchen or dining room, and cook declared she couldn't have the rascal loose, for whole pans of milk vanished, sheets of gingerbread were found in his den under the back steps, and nearly every day he was seen scrambling off with booty of some sort, while the fat cook waddled after, scolding and shaking the poker at him, to the great amusement of the boarders on the piazza. People bore with him a long time, but when he took a lively trot down the middle of the long dinner table one day, after eating all he liked, and smashing right and left as he scampered off, with a terrible clatter of silver, glass, and china, his angry master declared he wouldn't have such doings, and chained him to a post on the lawn. Here he tugged and growled dismally, while good little Jerry frisked gaily about, trying to understand what it all meant. But presently his besetting sin got him into trouble likewise. He loved to climb, and was never happier than when scrambling up the rough posts of the back piazza to bask in the sun on the roof above, peeping down with his sharp little eyes at the children who could not follow. He roosted in trees like a fat brown bird, and came tumbling down unexpectedly on lovers who sought quiet nooks to be romantic in. He explored the chimneys and threw into them any trifle he happened to find, being a rogue and fond of stealing hats, balls, dolls, or any small article that came in his way. But the fun he liked best was to climb in at the chamber windows and doze on the soft beds. for Jerry was a luxurious fellow and scorned the straw of his own den. This habit annoyed people much, and the poor bear often came bundling out of windows, with old gentlemen whacking him with canes or ladies throwing water after him. One evening, when there was a dance and everyone was busy downstairs, Jerry took a walk on the roof, and being sleepy, looked about for a cozy bed to take a nap in. Two brothers occupied one of these rooms, and both were Jerry's good friends, especially the younger. Georgie was fast asleep, as his dancing days had not yet begun, and Charlie was waltzing away downstairs. So Jerry crept into bed and nestled down beside his playmate, who was too sleepy to do anything but roll over, thinking the big brother had come to bed. By and by Charlie did come up, late and tired, and having forgotten a lamp, undressed in the moonlight, observing nothing till about to step into bed. Then, finding something rolled up in the clothes, thought it a joke of one of the boys, caught up a racket and began to bang away at the suspicious bundle. A scene of wild confusion followed, for Jerry growled and clawed and couldn't get out. Georgie woke, and thinking his bedfellow was his brother being abused by some frolicsome mate, held on to Jerry, defending him bravely, till a rent in the sheet allowed a shaggy head to appear, so close to his own that the poor child was painfully reminded of Red Riding Hood's false grandmother. Charlie was speechless with laughter at this discovery, and while Jerry bounced about the bed, snarling and hugging pillows as he tried to get free, terrified Georgie rushed down the hall, screaming, "The wolf! The wolf!" till he took refuge in his mother's room. Out popped night-capped heads, anxious voices cried, "Is it a fire?" and in a moment the house was astir. The panic might have been serious if Jerry had not come galloping downstairs, hotly pursued by Charlie in his nightgown, still belaboring the poor beast and howling, "He was in my bed! He scared George! I'll thrash him!" Then the alarmed ladies and gentlemen laughed and grew calm, while the boys all turned out and hunted Jerry upstairs and down, till he was captured and ignominiously lugged away to be tied in the barn. That prank sealed his fate, and he went to join his brother in captivity. Here they lived for a year, and went to housekeeping in a den in the bank, with a trough for their food, and a high knotted pole to climb on. They had many visitors and learned a few tricks, but were not happy bears, for they longed to be free, and the older they grew, the more they sighed for the great forest where they were born. The second summer something happened that parted them forever. Among the children that year were Fred and Fan Howard, two jolly young persons of 12 and 14. Of course the bears were very interesting, and Fred tried their tempers by tormenting them, while Fan won their hearts with cake and nuts, candy and caresses. Tom was Fred's favorite, and Jerry was Fan's. Tom was very intelligent, and covered himself with glory by various exploits. One was taking off the boards which roofed the den, so that the sun should dry the dampness after a rain, and he carefully replaced them at night. Any dog who approached the trough got his ears smartly boxed, and meddlesome boys were hugged till they howled for mercy. He danced in a way to convulse the soberest, and Fred taught him to shoulder arms in such a funny imitation of a stout old soldier of the town that the children rolled on the grass in fits of laughter when the cap was on, and the wooden gun flourished at word of command by the clumsy hero. Jerry had no accomplishments, but his sweet temper made many friends. He let the doves eat with him, the kittens frolic all over his broad back, and was never rough with the small people who timidly offered the buns he took so gently from their little hands. But he pined in captivity, refused his food, and lay in his den all day, or climbed to the top of the pole and sat there looking off to the cool, dark forest, with such a pensive air that Fan said it made her heart ache to see him. Just before the season ended, Jerry disappeared. No one could imagine how the chain broke, but gone he was, and never came back, to Fan's satisfaction and Tom's great sorrow. He mourned for his brother, and Mr. Hitchcock began to talk of killing him, for it would not do to let two bears loose in the neighborhood, as they sometimes killed sheep and did much harm. "I wish my father would buy him," said Fred. "I've always wanted a menagerie, and a tame bear would be a capital beginning." "I'll ask him, for I hate to have the poor old fellow killed," answered Fan. She not only begged Papa to buy Tom, but confessed that she had filed Jerry's chain and helped him to escape. "I know it was wrong, but I couldn't see him suffer," she said. "Now, if you buy Tom, I'll give you my $5 to help, and Mr. Hitchcock will forgive me and be glad to get rid of both the bears." After some consultation, Tom was bought, and orders were sent to have a house built for him in a sunny corner of the garden, with strong rings to chain him to and a good lock on the door to keep him in. When he was settled in these new quarters, he held daily receptions for some weeks. Young and old came to see him, and Fred showed off his menagerie with the pride of a budding Barnum. A bare spot was soon worn on the grass where Tom's parade ground was, and at all hours the poor fellow might be seen dancing and drilling, or sitting at his door, thoughtfully surveying the curious crowd, and privately wishing he had never been born. Here he lived for another year, getting so big that he could hardly turn round in his house, and so cross that Fred began to be a little afraid of him after several hugs much too close to be safe or agreeable. One morning the door of the house was found broken off, and Tom gone. Fred was rather relieved, but his father was anxious, and ordered out the boys of the neighborhood to find the runaway, lest he should alarm people or do some harm. It was an easy matter to trace him, for more than one terrified woman had seen the big brown beast sniffing round her back premises after food. A whole schoolful of children had been startled out of their wits by a bear's head at the window, and one old farmer was in a towering rage over the damage done to his beehives and garden patch by "the pesky critter afore he took to the woods." After a long tramp, poor Tom was found rolled up in a sunny nook, resting after a glorious frolic. He went home without much reluctance, but from that time it was hard to keep him. Bolts and bars, chains and ropes were of little use, for when the longing came, off he went, on one occasion carrying the house on his back, like a snail, till he tipped it over and broke loose. Fred was quite worn out with his pranks, and tried to sell or give him away, but nobody would buy or accept such a troublesome pet. Even tender-hearted Fan gave him up, when he frightened a little child into a fit and killed some sheep in his last holiday. It was decided that he must be killed, and a party of men, armed with guns, set out to carry the sentence into effect. Fred went also to see that all was properly done, and Fanny called after him with tears in her eyes, "Say good-bye for me, and kill him as kindly as you can." This time Tom had been gone for a week, and had evidently made up his mind to be a free bear, for he had wandered far into the deepest wood, and made a den for himself among the rocks. Here they found him, but could not persuade him to come out, and no bold Putnam was in the troop to creep in and conquer him there. "Bullets will reach him if we can't, so blaze away, boys, and finish him off. We have fooled away time enough, and I want to get home to my supper," said the leader of the hunt, after many attempts had been made to lure or drive Tom from his shelter. So they blazed away, and growls of pain proved that some of the bullets had hit. But Tom would not budge, and having used up their ammunition, the disappointed hunters went home, resolving to bring dogs next day and finish the job. They were spared the trouble, however, for when Fred looked out from his window in the morning, he saw that Tom had returned, and ran down to welcome the rebel back. But one look at the poor beast showed him that he had only come home to die, for he was covered with wounds, and lay moaning on his bed of straw, looking as pathetic as a bear could, his shaggy coat full of burrs, his head and breast full of shot, and one paw apparently broken. Fanny cried over him, and Fred was quite bowed down with remorse, but nothing could be done. And soon, with a vain effort to lick the hands that stroked him, poor Tom lifted his great paw for a farewell shake, and died, with his great head on his master's knee, in token of forgiveness. As if to atone for their seeming cruelty, Fanny hung the little house with black, while Tom lay in state, and Fred, resisting all temptations to keep his fine skin, buried him like a warrior, with his martial cloak around him, in the green woods he loved so well. 2. Boys. The next tenants of the little house were 3 riotous lads, for Fred's family moved away, and the newcomers took possession one fine spring day with great rejoicing over this ready-made plaything. They were queer fellows of 11, 12, and 14, for having read the Boys' Froissart and other warlike works, they were quite carried away by these stirring tales, and each boy was a hero. Harry, the eldest, was Harry of Navarre, and wore a white plume on every occasion. Ned was the Black Prince, and clanked in tin armor, while little Billy was William Tell and William Wallace by turns. Tom's deserted mansion underwent astonishing changes about this time. Bows and arrows hung on its walls, battle-axes, lances, and guns stood in the corners, helmets, shields, and all manner of strange weapons adorned the rafters, cannon peeped from its portholes, a drawbridge swung over the moat that soon surrounded it, the flags of all nations waved from its roof, and the small house was by turns an armory, a fort, a castle, a robber's cave, a warrior's tomb, a wigwam, and the Bastille. The neighbors were both amused and scandalized by the pranks of these dramatic young persons, for they enacted with much spirit and skill all the historical events which pleased their fancy, and speedily enlisted other boys to join in the new plays. At one time, painted and befeathered Indians whooped about the garden, tomahawking the unhappy settlers in the most dreadful manner. At another, Achilles, radiant in a tin helmet and boiler-cover shield, dragged Hector at the tail of his chariot, the wheelbarrow, drawn by 2 antic and antique steeds, who upset both victor and vanquished before the fun was over. Tell shot bushels of apples off the head of the stuffed suit of clothes that acted as his son. Coeur de Lion and Saladin hacked blocks and cut cushions à la Walter Scott, and tournaments of great splendor were held on the grass, in which knights from all ages, climes, and races tilted gallantly, while fair dames of tender years sat upon the wood-pile to play queens of beauty and award the prize of valor. Nor were the more modern heroes forgotten. Napoleon crossed the Alps, a muck-heap, a high fence, and prickly hedge, with intrepid courage. Wellington won many a Waterloo in the melon patch, and Washington glorified every corner of the garden by his heroic exploits. Grant smoked sweet fern cigars at the fall of Richmond. Sherman marched victoriously to Georgia through the corn and round the tomato bed, and Phil Sheridan electrified the neighborhood by tearing down the road on a much enduring donkey, stung to unusual agility by matches tied to his tail. It grew to be an almost daily question among the young people, "What are the Morton boys at now?" For these interesting youths were much admired by their mates, who eagerly manned the fences to behold the revels when scouts brought word of a new play going on. Mrs. Morton believed in making boys happy at home, and so allowed them entire liberty in the great garden, as it was safer than river, streets, or ball ground, where a very mixed crowd was to be found. Here they were under her own eye, and the safe, sweet tie between them still held fast. For she was never too busy to bind up their wounds after a fray, wave her handkerchief when cheers told of victory, rummage her stores for costumes, or join in their eager study of favorite heroes when rain put an end to their out-of-door fun. So the summer was a lively one, and though the vegetables suffered some damage, a good crop of healthy, happy hours was harvested, and all were satisfied. The little house looked much the worse for the raids made upon it, but still stood firm, with the stars and stripes waving over it, and peace seemed to reign one October afternoon as the boys lay under the trees eating apples and planning what to do next. "Bobby wants to be a knight of the Round Table. We might take him in and have fun with the rites, and make him keep a vigil and all that," proposed William Wallace, anxious to admit his chosen friend to the inner circle of the brotherhood. "He's such a little chap he'd be scared and howl. I don't vote for that," said the Black Prince, rather scornfully, as he lay with his kingly legs in the air and his royal mouth full of apple. "I do," declared Henry of Navarre, always generous and amiable. "Bob is a plucky little chap, and will do anything we put him to. He's poor, and the other fellows look down on him, so that's another reason why we ought to take him in and stand by him. Let's give him a good trial, and if he's brave, we'll have him." "So we will. Let's do it now. He's over there, waiting to be asked in. He doesn't go poking his nose where he isn't wanted, as some folks do," cried Billy, who had often been snubbed by the big boys in his efforts at knightly feats. A whistle brought Bobby, with a beaming face, for he burned to join the fun, but held back because he was not a gentleman's son. A sturdy, honest little soul was Bobby, true as steel, brave as a lion, and loyal as an old-time vassal to his young lord, kind Billy, who always told him all the plans, explained the mysteries, and shared the goodies when feasts were spread. Now he stood leaning against one of the posts of the little house whither the boys had adjourned, and listened bashfully while Harry told him what he must do to join the heroes of the Round Table. He did not understand half of it, but was ready for any trial, and took the comical oath administered to him with the utmost solemnity. "You must stay here locked in for some hours, and watch your armor. That's the vigil young knights have to keep before they could fight. You mustn't be scared at any noises you hear, or anything you see, or sing out for help, even if you stay here till dark. You'll be a coward if you do, and never have a sword." "I promise, truly. Hope to die if I don't," answered Bobby, fixing his blue eyes on the speaker and holding his curly head erect with the air of one ready to face any peril, for the desire of his soul was to own a sword, like Billy, and clash it on warlike occasions. Then a suit of armor was piled up on the red box, which was by turns altar, table, tomb, and executioner's block. Banners were hung over it, the place darkened, 2 candles lighted, and after certain rites which cannot be divulged, the little knight was left to his vigil with the door locked. The boys howled outside, smote on the roof, fired a cannon, and taunted the prisoner with derisive epithets to stir him to wrath. But no cry answered them, no hint of weariness, fear, or anger betrayed him, and after a half-hour of this sort of fun, they left him to the greater trial of silence, solitude, and uncertainty. The short afternoon was soon gone, and the tea-bell rang before the vigil had lasted long enough. "He won't know what time it is. Let's leave him till after supper, and then march out with torches and bring him in to a good feed. Mother won't mind, and Hetty likes to stuff fellows," proposed Harry, and all being hungry, the first part of the plan was carried out at once. But before tea was over, the unusual clang of the fire bells drove all thought of Bobby out of the boys' minds, as they raced away to the exciting scene to take their share in the shouting, running, and tumbling about in everyone's way. The great hotel was burning, and till midnight the town was in an uproar. No lives were lost, but much property, and nothing else was thought of till dawn. A heavy shower did good service, and about 1 o'clock people began to go home tired out. Mrs. Morton and the other ladies were too busy giving shelter to the people from the hotel, and making coffee for the firemen, to send their boys to bed. In fact, they could not catch them, for the youngsters were wild with excitement, and pervaded the place like will-o'-the-wisps, running errands, lugging furniture, splashing about with water, and howling till they were as hoarse as crows. "This is the Battle of Beauvais, and we've set the city afire by flinging pitch-pots over the walls," croaked Harry to Ned, as they bumped against each other, one carrying a great coffee-pot and the other a feather bed. "No, it's the fall of Troy, and I'm Aeneas lugging off the old man," panted Ned, staggering away with the heavy load on his back. At last the flurry was over, and our 3 lads, very dirty, wet, and tired, went to bed and to sleep, and never once thought of poor Bobby till next morning. Then Harry suddenly rose up, with an exclamation that effectually roused both his brothers. "By St. Denis, we've left that boy there all night!" "He wouldn't be such a fool as to stay. That old lock's broken easily enough," said Ned, looking troubled in spite of his words. "Yes, he would. He promised, and he'll keep his word like a true knight. It rained and was cold, and no one knew where he was. Oh, dear, I hope he isn't dead!" cried Billy, tumbling out of bed and into his clothes as fast as he could. The others laughed, but dressed with unusual speed, and flew to the garden house to find the lock unbroken and all as still inside as when they left it. Looking very anxious, Harry opened the door and all peeped in. There at his post before the altar lay the little knight fast asleep. Rain had soaked his clothes, the chilly night air made his lips and hands purple with cold, and the trials of those long hours left the round cheeks rather pale. But he still guarded his arms, and at the first sound was awake and ready to defend them, though somewhat shaky with sleep and stiffness. The penitent boys poured forth apologies, in which fire, remorse, and breakfast were oddly mixed. Bobby forgave them like a gentleman, only saying with a laugh and a shiver, "Guess I better go home. Ma'll be worried about me. If I'd known being out all night and getting wet was part of the business, I'd 'a' left word and brought a blanket. Be I a round table now? Shall I have a sword and train with the rest? I didn't holler once, and wasn't much scared, for all the bells and the dark and the rain." "You've won your spurs, and we'll knight you just as soon as we get time. You're a brave fellow, and I'm proud to have you as one of my men. Please don't say much about this. We'll make it all right, and we're awfully sorry," answered Harry, while Ned put his own jacket over the wet shoulders, and Billy beamed at him, feeling that his friend's exploits outdid any of his own. Bobby marched away as proudly as if he already saw the banners waving over him, and felt the accolade that made him a true knight. But that happy moment was delayed for some time, because the cold caught in that shower threatened a fit of sickness, and the boys' play looked as if it might end in sad earnest. Harry and his brothers confessed all to mamma, listened with humility to her lecture on true knighthood, and did penance by serving Bobby like real brothers in arms while he was ill. As soon as the hardy boy was all right again, they took solemn counsel together how they should reward him and atone for their carelessness. Many plans were discussed, but none seemed fine enough for this occasion till Billy had a bright idea. "Let's buy Bob some hens. He wants some dreadfully, and we ought to do something grand after treating him so badly and nearly killing him." "Who's got any money?" "I haven't, but it's a good idea," responded Ned, vainly groping in all his pockets for a cent to head the subscription with. "Mamma would lend us some, and we could work to pay for it," began Billy. "Nope, I've a better plan," interrupted Harry with authority. "We ought to make a sacrifice and suffer for our sins. We will have an auction and sell our arms. The boys want them, and will pay well. My lords and gentlemen, what say ye?" "We will," responded the loyal subjects of King Henry. "Winter is coming, and we can't use them," said Billy innocently. "And by next spring we shall be too old for such games," added Ned. "'Tis well. Ho! Call hither my men. Bring out the suits of mail. Sound the trumpets and set on," thundered Harry, striking an attitude, and issuing his commands with royal brevity. A funny scene ensued, for while Billy ran to collect the boys, Ned dismantled the armory and Hal disposed of the weapons in the most effective manner, on trees, fences, and grass, where the bidders could examine and choose at their ease. Their mates had always admired and coveted these warlike treasures, for some were real and others ingenious imitations. So they gladly came at the sound of the hunter's horn, which was blown when Robin Hood wanted his merry men. Harry was the auctioneer, and rattled off the most amazing medley of nonsense in praise of the articles, which he rapidly knocked down to the highest bidder. The competition was lively, for the boys laughed so much they hardly knew what they were doing, and made the rashest offers, but they all knew what the money was to be used for, so they paid their bills handsomely and marched off with crossbows, old guns, rusty swords, and tin armor, quite contented with their bargains. $7 was realized by the sale, and a fine rooster and several hens solemnly presented to Bobby, who was overwhelmed by this unexpected atonement, and immediately established his fowls in the woodshed, where they happily resided through the winter, and laid eggs with such gratifying rapidity that he earned quite a little fortune, and insisted on saying that his vigil had not only made a knight of him, but a millionaire. 3. Babies. The little house stood empty till spring. Then a great stir went on in the garden, getting it ready for a new occupant. It was mended, painted red, fitted up with a small table and chairs, and a swing. Sunflowers stood sentinel at the door, vines ran over it, and little beds of flowers were planted on either side. Paths were dug all round the lawn, and a baby carriage was rolled up and down to harden them. The neighbors wondered what was coming next, and one June day they found out, for a procession appeared escorting the new tenant to the red mansion, with great rejoicing among the boys. First came Billy blowing the horn, then Ned waving their best banner, then Hal drawing the baby wagon, in which, as on a throne, sat the little cousin who had come to spend the summer, and rule over them like a small, sweet tyrant. A very sprightly damsel was 4-year-old Queenie, blue-eyed, plump, and rosy, with a cloud of yellow curls, chubby arms that embraced everyone, and a pair of stout legs that trotted all day. She surveyed her kingdom with cries of delight, and took possession of "mine tottage" at once, beginning housekeeping by a tumble out of the swing, a header into the red chest, and a pinch in the leaf of the table. But she won great praise from the boys by making light of these mishaps, and came up smiling, with a bump on her brow, a scratch on her pug nose, and a bruise on one fat finger, and turned out tea for the gentlemen as if she had done it all her life. For the table was set, and all manner of tiny cakes and rolls stood ready to welcome her. This was only the beginning of tea parties, for very soon a flock of lovely little friends came to play with Queenie, and such pretty revels went on it seemed as if fairies had taken possession of the small house. Dolls had picnics, kittens went a-visiting, tin carts rattled up and down, gay balloons flew about, pygmy soldiers toddled around the paths in paper caps, and, best of all, rosy little girls danced on the grass, picked the flowers, chased butterflies, and sang as blithely as the birds. Queenie took the lead in these frolics, and got into no end of scrapes by her love of exploration, often leading her small friends into the strawberry bed, down the road, over the wall, or to some neighbor's house, coolly demanding "a dint o' water and gingerbread for all us ones." Guards were set, bars and locks put up, orders given, and punishments inflicted, but all in vain. The dauntless baby always managed to escape, and after anxious hunts and domestic flurries, would be found up a tree, under the big rhubarb leaves, in a hen house, or calmly strolling to town without her hat. All sorts of people took her to drive at her request, and brought her back just as her agitated relatives were flying to the river in despair. Once she departed with a flock of sheep, and was returned so dirty no one knew her till she was scrubbed. Another time she passed the morning in the pig pen, having fallen over the fence, and finding pleasant society in a dozen young piggies, stayed to play with them till discovered among the straw, surrounded by her new friends, one of whom slept sweetly in her arms. "We must tie her up," said Mrs. Morton, quite worn out with her pranks. So a strong cord was put round Queenie's waist, and fastened to one of the rings in the little house where Tom used to be chained. At first she raged and tugged, then submitted, and played about as if she didn't care. But she laid plans in her naughty little mind, and carried them out to the great dismay of Bessie, the maid. "I want to tut grass," she said in her most persuasive tones. So Bessie gave her the rusty scissors she was allowed to use, and let her play make hay till her toy wagon was full. "I want a dint o' water, please," was the next request, and Bessie went in to get it. She was delayed a few moments, and when she came out no sign of Queenie remained but a pile of yellow hair cut off in a hurry, and the end of the cord. Sly Boots was gone, scissors and all. Then there was racing and calling, scolding and wailing, but no Queenie was to be seen anywhere on the premises. Poor Bessie ran one way, Aunt Morton another, and Billy, who happened to be at home, poked into all the nooks and corners for the runaway. An hour passed, and things began to look serious, when Harry came in much excited and laughing so he could hardly speak. "Where do you think that dreadful baby has turned up?" "Over at Pat Floyd's. He found her in the water pipes. You know a lot of those big ones are lying in the back street ready to use as soon as the place is dug. Well, that little rascal crept in and then couldn't turn round, so she went on till she came out by Pat's house and nearly scared him out of his wits. The pipes were not joined, so she had light and air, but I guess she had a hard road to travel. Such a hot, dirty, tired baby you never saw. Mrs. Floyd is washing her up. You better go and get her, Bess." Bess went and returned with naughty Queenie, looking as if rats had gnawed her curls off, and the sand of the great desert had been ground into her hands and knees, not to mention the iron rust that ruined her pretty pink frock, or the crown of her hat rubbed to rags. "I wasn't frighted. You said daw'd be all wound, so I goed wid along, and Miss Floyd gived me a nice cold tatter and a tootie, and de bid Dord wash my hands wif his wed tun." That was Queenie's account of the matter, but she behaved so well after it that her friends suspected the perilous prank had made a good impression upon her. To keep her at home she was set to farming, and the little house was a barn. In it lived a rocking horse, several wooden cows, woolly sheep, cats and dogs, as well as a queer collection of carts and carriages, tools and baskets. Every day the busy little farmer dug and hoed, planted and watered her garden, made hay, harvested vegetables, picked fruit, or took care of animals, pausing now and then to ride her horse, drive out in her phaeton, or go to an imaginary fire with the engine Billy had made for her. The little friends came to help her, and the flower beds soon looked as if an earthquake had upheaved them, for things were planted upside down, holes dug, stones piled, and potatoes laid about as if expected to dig themselves. But cheeks bloomed like roses, small hands got brown, and busy feet trotted firmly about the paths, while the red barn echoed with the gayest laughter all day long. On Queenie's 5th birthday in September she gave a gypsy party, and all the small neighbors came to it. A tent was pitched, 3 tall poles held up a kettle over a truly fire that made the water really boil, and supper was spread on the grass. The little girls wore red and blue petticoats, gay shawls or cloaks, bright handkerchiefs on their heads, and as many beads and breastpins as they liked. Some had tambourines and shook them as they danced. One carried a dolly in the hood of her cloak like a true gypsy, and all sung, skipping hand in hand round the fire. The mammas looked on and helped about supper, and Bess sat in the tent like an old woman and told pleasant fortunes as she looked in the palms of the soft little hands the children showed her. They had a charming time, and all remembered it well, for that night, when the fun was over, and everyone in bed, and the world asleep, a great storm came on. The wind blew a gale, and the chimney tops flew off. Blinds banged, trees were broken, apples whisked from the boughs by the bushel, and much mischief was done. But worst of all, the dear little house blew away. The roof went in one direction, the boards in another, the poor horse lay heels up, and the rest of the animals were scattered far and wide over the garden. Great was the lamentation next morning. When the children saw the ruin, the boys felt that it was past mending and gave it up, while Queenie consoled herself for the devastation of her farm by the childish belief that a crop of new cats and dogs, cows and horses would come up in the spring from the seed sowed broadcast by the storm. So that was the sad end of the little house in the garden. End of chapter 8.